Violence is one of the most personal and even intimate acts between human beings. It can be symbolic, thematic, biblical, Shakespearean, romantic, allegorical, even transcendental. Thomas Foster explains the meaning of violence in literature within his book, How to Read Literature Like a Professor. It is impossible to escape violence, especially in writing. It stands for something, it progresses the novel, it defines a character. Foster observes that, in written works, there exist two main categories of violence: character against character, or against oneself, or authorial violence used to push the story forward. But there are other ways to define violence, sectioning violence into examples present in books like Life of Pi and other media. Let's first examine the meaningless kind of violence shown throughout literature. Foster states, "Our lives and deaths are as nothing to the universe, of which the best that can be said is that it is indifferent. Some violence shows merely that in the world, violence just happens, no explanation found." Let's draw this back to Pi's story, specifically when Pi's companion / hallucination of the Frenchman castaway is killed by Richard Parker. When it boils down to it, the Frenchman, real or not, was a solace to Pi, so his death seems so meaningless and cruel. Similar examples are present in Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, telling stories of Vietnam soldiers killing a buffalo slowly or strapping a puppy to a bouncing Betty. The reason for it? There is none. Pointless, futile violence carries a certain weight in literature, and it founds the point sometimes violence does just happen. Going further, violence is also very often used to mark the tone of a work. Darkness, despair, anger, contempt, these are all examples of tones that rely on some form of violence. Let's once again look at Life of Pi. On page 274, Pi's story converges to a tone of violence as Pi reflects, "You reach a point where you're at the bottom of hell, yet you have your arms crossed and a smile on your face, and you feel you're the luckiest person on earth. Why? Because at your feet you have a tiny dead fish." Not only does this part of the book switch Pi's attitude, but also changes the tone, reforming killing from a tragedy to a source of joy. This violence is imperative to the tone of the book and to shaping Pi's character. Now bring it to one of the most famous war movies in history, the first movie in the Library of Congress, Saving Private Ryan. Everyone associates that first D-Day scene as the beginning of the movie, setting an initial tone of death and carnage. But wait, that's not the first scene. The first scene is about Private Ryan's mother learning of her 3 other sons' deaths. So why do people gloss over that important part? Because the tone shift in that D-Day scene is so strong and that part so violent, it is smashed into the viewer's memory. Tone is a crucial tool in any kind of work. So when violence becomes an aspect of the tone, the violence defines the story. Plot progression is another common way a reader observes violence. It can act as a motivation, a turning point, or a resolution. For example, Pi's mother fighting the cook on the lifeboat is necessary as it changes the dynamic of the survivors, eventually leading to Pi's mother dying. Without the initial act of violence, Pi would never have killed the cook in an act of vengeance. You see, violence has a way of pushing the story ahead, making things happen, causing a domino effect. The Great Gatsby brings in this kind of violence. Remember that scene where Myrtle is hit by Gatsby's car? Okay, and do you remember how this led Wilson to kill Gatsby, given that he thought Gatsby had been driving? Of course you do. This was the climax of the novel, and the ending of a central character's life. So often in literature, one act of killing equates to another, even if the first was accidental. On the same note, the Bible tells of a similar deed when Moses kills a slave driver, this being the breaking point that motivates Moses to leave his life as a prince. Without this death, Moses would have never left Egypt, and the Hebrews would have remained in slavery. Violence, intentional or not, leads to a more complex plot, and it also keeps the reader invested in the story. Lastly, violence can be symbolic. Foster makes the statement that violence in literature, while it is literal, is usually also something else. That punch in the nose may be a metaphor. Pi's most symbolic act of violence is his first killing, easily. In the book, it is written, "Tears flowing down my cheeks. I egged myself on until I heard a cracking sound, and I no longer felt any life fighting in my hands. I was now as guilty as Cain." This murder means so much more for Pi, symbolizing his loss of innocence and his rebirth as a survivor. Where else is this kind of violence shown? Star Wars! In the end of the Better trilogy, Darth Vader kills his master, Emperor Palpatine, and in doing so, kills his dark side and in a way absolves his lifetime of evil. Vader is no stranger to violence, of course, but this killing is what, in his last moments, redefines him and resolves Luke's inner turmoil. In the end, violence is significant wherever it is present, in movies, literature, or in life. As long as violence exists in the world, it will exist in the stories we tell.